God wants to hear you. Let's pray. Shed.
Father, tonight I come without armor, without explanations, carrying the quiet weight of a soul that has walked farther than it knows how to name. And I confess that the heaviness I feel is not proof of weakness, but evidence of endurance. Because tiredness is the language of those who kept going long after comfort left the room, and you see this fatigue that words cannot hold. The kind that settles in the bones and softens the voice. The kind that comes from loving deeply, believing faithfully, and standing upright when it would have been easier to disappear. And I breathe before you not to impress or perform, but simply to exist honestly, trusting that you are not disappointed by my weariness, that you do not confuse exhaustion with failure, and that you know the difference between a heart that has quit and a heart that is simply asking for rest. So I lay this moment before you like a candle flickering but still lit, whispering gently for you to draw near right now, knowing that even in my quiet, breathless state you remain close, attentive, and kind. You meet me in this tired place with a gentleness that does not rush or demand, and you remind my heart that strength is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is simply the courage to wake up again and choose to stay present when everything inside wants to shut down. And you know how many nights I stayed awake holding questions without answers. How many days I smiled while carrying silent battles no one noticed. And still, you never labeled me weak for needing pauses along the way, because you are the God who understands that even mountains rest beneath the sky, that rivers slow before they continue their course, and that weariness does not cancel purpose. It reveals how far love has already carried me. So as I sit here with you, I allow myself to stop pretending I am fine and softly ask you to sit with me in this moment, trusting that your presence alone is enough to steady my breathing and remind my soul that rest is not retreat, it is preparation. You have watched every step that brought me here, every unseen mile where hope was chosen over comfort, and you know that this tiredness did not come from laziness, but from faith, that kept standing when answers delayed. And I feel you gently untangling the lie that says I should be stronger by now, because you never measured strength by how little someone feels, but by how faithfully they remain when feeling is gone. And you remind me that even Jesus sat down by the well. Even he slept in the storm, not because he was weak, but because rest is holy when it comes from trust. So I let these heavy thoughts loosen their grip, and I quietly invite you to hold this weight with me for a moment, believing that nothing I place in your hands will ever be too much for your care. You speak to me in the calm spaces between my thoughts, not accusing, not correcting, only restoring. And you tell my heart that fatigue does not erase calling, that pauses do not cancel promises, that slowing down is not the same as giving up. And I feel you separating what is mine to carry from what was never meant to rest on my shoulders, reminding me that I was never designed to be unbreakable, only to be held. And as I sit with this truth settling gently inside me, I notice how much pressure I placed on myself to always be okay, to always be strong, to never need help. And I release that burden now as I quietly invite you to take the expectations that have drained me, trusting that you know how to carry what I no longer can without asking me to prove anything first. You see how my spirit has learned to endure quietly, how I kept moving even when joy felt distant, and you call this perseverance, not weakness, because you recognize the courage it takes to keep showing up when applause is absent and progress feels invisible. And you remind me that tired souls are often the ones who have loved the longest, forgiven the most, and hoped beyond reason. And I feel your compassion wash over the places where I judged myself too harshly, where I believed rest meant failure. And in this tender awareness, I gently ask you to slow my racing thoughts and sit with me here, trusting that your nearness is restoring me in ways I cannot yet see but deeply need. You remind me that seasons of weariness often come after seasons of giving. When hands have been open for so long they begin to tremble, and you do not shame trembling hands. You steady them. And I sense you teaching my heart that strength is not the absence of need, but the wisdom to recognize it. That even the strongest vessels must be refilled if they are to keep pouring. And I notice how gently you dismantle the harsh inner voice that told me to push harder instead of listening deeper, replacing it with a quieter truth that says I am allowed to rest without losing who I am. And in this softened space, I lean toward you and ask you to refill what has been emptied, trusting that you replenish without keeping score and restore without delay. You stay with me in this unfolding stillness, not rushing the process, not hurrying the healing, and you let me feel how exhaustion does not scare you or lessen your love, because you have always known the limits of my frame and never expected me to carry what only you can hold. And I sense you reframing my weariness as a signal rather than a sentence, a whisper from my soul asking for care instead of condemnation. And as this understanding settles, I feel permission returning to my breathing, to my pace, to my humanity. So in this quiet honesty, I draw closer and ask you to teach me how to rest without guilt and trust without fear, believing that you are shaping renewal even now in ways my tired eyes cannot yet recognize. You gently remind me that I was never meant to be a constant flame without pause, that even the light you placed within me needs moments of shelter to burn steadily again. And you show me how much courage it took to keep believing when results were slow and prayers seemed unanswered, how much inner strength was required to stay kind in a world that often rewards hardness. And I feel you honoring the quiet resilience I forgot to acknowledge in myself, calling it faithfulness rather than frailty. And as I absorb this truth, I turn my heart toward you and softly ask you to guard this fragile hope within me, trusting that you protect what is sincere and nurture what is weary with patience and care. You speak life into the places where discouragement tried to settle, and you remind me that being tired means I have been walking, believing, and choosing hope again and again, even when the road felt long. And you gently correct the lie that says, rest is something I must earn, because your love has never been transactional or dependent on performance. And I feel a quiet relief wash through me as I realize I do not have to justify my exhaustion to you. I only have to bring it. And in this moment of surrender, I open my hands and ask you to receive everything I have been holding too tightly, trusting that you know how to turn weariness into renewal without force or haste. You allow me to see my journey with kinder eyes, helping me recognize that this tiredness is not a flaw, but a testimony of how long I have stayed faithful in places that asked much of me. And you remind me that endurance often wears the face of quiet persistence rather than dramatic victory. And I assume you are teaching my heart to honor the slow, unseen work happening beneath the surface, where roots grow deeper before anything changes above ground. And as this truth settles, I feel a soft release in my chest, like permission to stop measuring myself by speed or outcomes. So I gently ask you to remain close as I learn to trust this slower rhythm, believing that you are still working even when my strength feels thin and my pace becomes gentle. You meet me again in the middle of this long breath, and you remind me that even pauses are part of progress, that silence does not mean abandonment, and waiting does not mean wasting time, because you are always present in the in-between moments where nothing seems to change outwardly, but everything is being rearranged within. And I feel you reassuring my heart that I am not behind, not late, not failing, only human and deeply cared for. And you show me how often I mistook survival for weakness, when in truth it was resilience quietly doing its work. So I lean into this reassurance and gently ask you to anchor my thoughts when doubt tries to speak louder than truth, trusting that your steady presence will hold me firm even when my energy feels low and my steps grow slower. You remind me that the soul, like the body, needs space to breathe after long seasons of effort. And you show me how compassion begins when I stop demanding more of myself than you ever did, because you never asked me to outrun grace or to prove my worth through exhaustion. And I feel you gently untie the knot between my value and my productivity, teaching me that I am loved even when I am still, even when nothing is accomplished, even when all I can do is show up tired and honest. And in this quiet unraveling, I turn my heart toward you and softly ask you to help me receive this truth without resistance, trusting that learning to rest in your love is not losing ground, but finally standing on solid ground. You stay attentive to the quiet signals I learned to ignore, the subtle warnings of a heart that has carried more than it admits. And you teach me that listening to my limits is not a lack of faith, but an act of wisdom. Because you designed me with rhythms, not endless demands. And I sense you softening the fear that if I stop, everything will fall apart, reminding me that you are steady even when I am not, and that the world does not rest on my shoulders. And as this reassurance settles deeper, I feel myself loosening the grip on control, and I gently ask you to help me trust you in the slowing down, believing that what is held by you will never be lost, even when I finally let it rest. You remind me that you are not measuring me by how much I can still give, but by how honestly I come to you. And in that knowing, I feel safe enough to stop hiding the fatigue I once tried to outrun, because you already saw it and stayed anyway. And you show me that tired hearts often carry deep sincerity, a quiet loyalty that kept choosing love even when it cost more than it returned. And I sense you honoring that faithfulness with tenderness rather than correction, inviting my soul into a gentler posture where effort is no longer the currency of belonging. So I draw closer and quietly ask you to teach me how to receive from you without guilt, trusting that being held is not a reward for strength, but a gift freely given to those who simply remain. You meet me with patience where I expected pressure, and you remind me that healing is rarely loud or instant. Often it begins as a subtle easing, a slow return of breath, a quiet softening of thoughts that were clenched for too long, and I feel you inviting me to release the urgency to feel better immediately, teaching me that restoration is a journey, not a switch, and that tiredness does not disqualify me from your care. It draws me closer to it. And as this truth settles gently inside me, I notice how my shoulders begin to lower, how my heart stops bracing for disappointment. So in this calmer space, I ask you to stay with me as you continue this unseen work, trusting that every small moment of peace is already a sign that you are near and attentive. You speak softly to the places in me that learn to survive by staying alert, by never fully resting. And you remind me that I do not have to remain on guard in your presence because you are not another demand. You are a refuge, and I feel you creating safety where tension once lived, allowing my heart to unclench little by little as trust replaces strain. And you help me see that tiredness is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be tended with care, like a flame shielded from the wind so it can keep burning. And as this awareness grows, I gently ask you to cover my weary thoughts with your peace, trusting that under your watchful care, even fragile strength is enough to carry me forward, one breath at a time. You remind me that even when my energy feels thin, your presence remains full, steady, and unwavering, and I sense you teaching my heart that I do not have to match your strength to walk with you. I only have to stay connected, because you have always carried what I could not, and you continue to do so without complaint or fatigue. And I feel you lifting the quiet fear that if I slow down, I will be forgotten, replacing it with the assurance that I am seen most clearly when I stop striving. And in this gentle reassurance, I lean closer and ask you to help me trust that I am still held, still guided, still loved even when my pace is slower and my steps are small. You guide me to notice how much of my tiredness comes from carrying tomorrow before it arrives, from rehearsing outcomes I cannot control, and you gently draw my attention back to this moment where your grace is already present and sufficient, and I feel you loosening the anxious grip of the future on my heart, reminding me that strength is found in staying here, not in racing ahead. And you show me that rest begins when I allow today to be enough, even with its unanswered questions and unfinished edges. So in this quiet grounding, I turn toward you and softly ask you to help me remain here with you, trusting that each present breath is already supported by your faithful care. You stay beside me as I begin to feel the subtle shift from strain to trust, and you remind me that renewal does not always announce itself with sudden strength, but often arrives as quiet permission to be human again. And I sense you teaching my heart that being tired does not mean I am empty. It means I have been poured out in places that mattered, loved where it was costly, and believed where it would have been easier to withdraw. And you look at this offering with kindness, not disappointment. So in this softened awareness, I gently ask you to guard me from the voice that demands constant output, trusting that you delight in my presence even when my hands are resting and my soul is simply breathing with you. You remind me that weariness often follows obedience, that tired hearts are frequently the ones that said yes when it would have been easier to turn away. And you help me see how much unseen faith was required to keep choosing what was right without immediate reward. And I feel you honoring those quiet choices that never made noise but shaped my character deeply. And you assure me that nothing given in love was ever wasted or forgotten by you. And as this truth settles gently inside me, I feel gratitude replacing self-judgment. So I turn toward you and quietly ask you to help me see myself the way you see me, trusting that your gaze is kinder than my own and strong enough to restore what constant giving has worn thin. You stay close as my heart begins to believe what my mind resisted for so long, that I do not need to collapse in order to be cared for, and that you are attentive even before I reach my limits. And I feel you reminding me that rest is not a reaction to failure, but a rhythm you built into love itself, because nothing that is meant to last is forced to burn without pause. And you gently free me from the pressure to constantly explain myself, to justify why I am slower, quieter, more reflective than before, showing me that maturity often looks like listening instead of rushing. So in this growing trust, I turn toward you and softly ask you to help me honor these limits without shame, believing that respecting what you designed is another form of faith and not a retreat from purpose. You remind me that I'm allowed to arrive here exactly as I am, without rehearsed strength or borrowed courage, and you welcome the version of me that is slower, quieter, and more aware of its own need for grace. And I sense you teaching my heart that tiredness can become a doorway instead of a dead end when it leads me back to dependence rather than despair. And you show me how much peace comes when I stop fighting my humanity and start trusting your sufficiency. And as this truth settles deeper, I feel a gentle courage rise, not the kind that pushes harder, but the kind that stays honest. So I lean into this moment and softly ask you to help me walk forward with humility and trust, believing that I do not need to be strong all the time to be deeply held by you. You stay present as my expectations begin to loosen their grip, and you remind me that I was never asked to carry perfection, only sincerity, never asked to have endless strength, only a willing heart. And I feel you lifting the quiet pressure to always appear capable, teaching me that authenticity before you is far more healing than performance. And you show me that tiredness often sharpens what truly matters, stripping away what was unnecessary and leaving only what is real. And as this clarity settles in, I feel a deeper calm replacing the urge to prove myself. So I gently turn toward you and ask you to help me keep choosing honesty over appearance, trusting that in your presence I am safe to be real, unfinished, and still deeply loved. You remind me that even this season of tiredness has meaning, that nothing in my life is random or overlooked by you, and I sense you helping me see how slowing down has made me more attentive, more compassionate, more aware of the fragile beauty in small moments I once rushed past. And you teach me that strength refined by weariness often becomes gentler, wiser, and more rooted in grace. And I feel you inviting my heart to stop resisting this shaping, to stop wishing this season away, and instead to trust that you are forming something lasting within me. So in this quiet acceptance, I lean toward you and softly ask you to help me remain open to what you are doing now, believing that even when I feel tired, I am still becoming who you are calling me to be. You stay with me as the noise inside begins to soften, and you remind me that becoming quieter does not mean becoming smaller. It often means becoming deeper, and I feel you teaching my heart that this tiredness has stripped away false urgency and left behind a clearer sense of what truly matters, of who I am when I am no longer trying to outrun my own limits. And you gently show me that there is strength in staying present without forcing answers, in allowing life to unfold without constant resistance. And as this understanding settles, I sense a calm resolve forming, not loud or dramatic, just steady and true. So I turn toward you and quietly ask you to help me protect this inner stillness, trusting that from this place of rest, you will guide my next steps with wisdom and care. You draw me gently toward a place of quiet completion, not as an ending, but as a soft resting point where my heart can finally exhale. And you remind me that tonight I do not leave stronger in appearance, but steadier in truth, knowing deep within that I was never weak, only tired, and never abandoned, only learning to rest. And I feel you sealing this prayer not with urgency, but with peace, with the assurance that tomorrow does not depend on my energy, but on your faithfulness. So I lean fully into you now, and invite you to bless this weary heart with renewal that unfolds slowly and surely. And I receive your gentle blessing as you whisper peace over my mind, rest over my body, light over my path, and quiet strength over my soul, carrying me forward wrapped in your care today and always.